Potato, potato, tomato, tomato.
I'm Greg.
I'm Julie, and we're the Crafty Winers.
Our garden was full of tomatoes, and you can only eat so much caprese salad.
And we eat a lot, but
We ate a lot. So what do you do with tomatoes that you want to get rid of so that they don't go bad?
make wine, of course.
Of course.
This is my cherry tomato plant went absolutely berserk. This right here is 2.5 pounds of cherry tomatoes, and I wanted 3 pounds, so I'm adding this guy in there too. So what I'm going to do first step is we wash these really good and got the stems off of them, put them in a sanitized bowl, and then I'm going to chop them up, and I won't make you watch that whole process because it'll be a little while.
So they're all cut. You could probably smush them instead of cutting them in half, but
Yeah.
just make sure that each one of them is going to get rid of their juice easy.
We just want the meat exposed to the best of our abilities. And you can use any tomato. I just had an abundance of cherry tomatoes. I'm going to put them in this bag, which is probably entirely too big for them.
This
It's the smallest one we have.
And the corgis, Pippin and Nori, are
They
waiting.
got
That's what
one.
they were waiting for. They were waiting for her to drop one. But she only dropped one, which means
Which one got it?
She's a very mean person.
Which one got it?
Pippin, I believe.
Here, Nori.
And if I was wrong, I've got a pissed off dog right now. One dog happy, one dog sad. So we're putting these into bags that came from Amazon that are called, I think, brew bags. They're fairly cheap and they're reusable until they start falling apart. Just keep washing them. Wash them probably with bleach.
Yeah.
I think this is the first time this particular bag has been used, but it's hard to tell because they do clean up well.
And this is what we use for all of our actual real fruit wines. I didn't mean real fruit. It's all real fruit, but
This is fruit.
no, tomatoes are fruit. You're correct.
So there is some juice and stuff on the cutting board that we're not going to want to lose.
That is true.
So
You can just put it in there.
I don't think the seeds are terribly important, but the juice is. So why are we putting this into a pan? There are a couple ways that you can make sure that the wild yeast that is probably still on these even after being washed is sterilized so that it isn't competing with the yeast that we're going to put in it. One way is to use potassium sorbate. That was an option, but we decided that we are going to pasteurize these instead.
And it's kind of a multi-purpose thing because the boiling water will help
Lose a bunch of juice.
Soften them and extract some of the juices too.
So we're using purified water instead of distilled water.
I grabbed the wrong one.
And it's 96 ounces that we put in here, and that'll make more sense why it's 96 ounces shortly. The gist of it is that we want to have room for the sugar, and we also want there to be enough water to cover up the fruit and give room for the immersion cooker.
Which we are using a sous vide, which can be used for a lot of things.
Immersion cooker.
Immersion cooker for sous vide
Which can be used
method. And it can be used for a lot of things. In this case, we're going to pasteurize our tomatoes with it.
So we want to raise the temperature of the tomatoes in the water up to 160.
165 for 15 seconds.
But part of this process is raising the temperature, which is going to take it a while. The tomatoes are going to be sitting in this water as it's warming to that temperature.
Them covered.
And by the time this is 165, we're going to let it hold there for 15 seconds, and then we will remove the heat.
I can't see the thermostat, so you're going to have to change it.
165.0 and press play. I don't think I want my bag to be touching the cooker, so I'm going to kind of hold it away a little bit. Okay, we're at 165, and we have been there for about 30 seconds. So we're calling this pasteurized.
Let me disconnect it.
165 is obviously hot enough to hurt you. it would have destroyed all the wild yeast that were on it, as well as any bacteria that might have been on the fruit. We don't want to leave the fruit in here very long because it's also going to be kind of cooking it. But we want to reuse this water for sure because it's going to have a lot of flavor in it right now. It's kind of a reddish right now. Anyway, you'll see it in a minute. We did have to put a little more water in here to get past the minimum.
The minimum line, which
like,
is right here, but
we were above it, but
it wasn't liking
it
it.
didn't think it was above it. So we added about another 6 ounces of water.
So I'm going to unplug this and get it out of the way.
Okay.
Before I burn myself with it.
And we will also put the water in our pitcher and be back. We're going to do it on the sink so that we don't make a fool of ourselves. So it looked more red in the kettle, in the pot, than it does now. It's actually about the same color as our Chenin Blanc.
Yeah, it is. That's funny.
And it's about 96. So we lost some to evaporation. I think the 5 or 6 ounces of water we put to get above the minimum line mostly has evaporated out. So that's good. So it would be smart to let it cool down probably before we do our gravity.
Yeah.
Because it's going to be so off. The hydrometer is calibrated for 60 degrees.
And this was 165.
If this wasn't a plastic hydrometer, I would say that a glass one could possibly break if you put it in too hot a liquid too. So I think I'm going to put some liquid in the freezer to let it cool down, and then we'll do the hydrometer reading. So we've got our must down to about 80 degrees, which is going to be fine for doing the hydrometer. That temperature is going to affect the hydrometer reading. You can use our tool on craftywiners.com/tools to have the tool do the offset for you so you can see exactly what it is based on the must temperature, but it's going to be close enough that we're not going to really be concerned about it today. This has been a kind of a slow filling process already on this. Next, we're doing carrot wine after this tomato wine.
I did want to mention, if you're using the sous vide method that we did, we put in the tomatoes in the beginning while it was heating up because we only heated up to 165. But if you do it on the stovetop and you take it to boiling, you'll want to wait until it's at boiling to put your tomatoes in, leave them in 30 seconds or so, and then take them back out.
Just so you're not cooking them.
Yeah.
Which will change the flavor. Okay, so our specific gravity right now is 1.002. So we have a tool on craftywiners.com/tools that is called Calculate Sugar to Add to Must.
1.002?
Yep.
Yep.
And it has been, which means, by the way, that there is almost zero sugar in this.
That's going to be a lot of sugar.
So we've adjusted our tool to let you account for the sugar that is in the fruit.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as I know, there isn't another tool out there that will do that for you. So right now, I'm sure there'll be copiers soon. So what she did was she put in the specific gravity what it is now, and it's basically that of water with a little tiny bit of sugar that leached out when we heated it up.
Yeah.
We want it to be we said 10.5 is fine, and that's what it defaults to.
Yeah.
So she's not even changing that. Then she's scrolling all the way down, and we're at a section that says, if adding fruit. So what this is going to do is subtract the fruit that is calculated to be in the tomatoes from the sugar that we want to add to get to 10.5%. So she chose tomato, and she said how many pounds there are.
3.
And it's already defaulted to being 1 gallon of must. So how many grams of sugar? I'm too blind to see the...
38.1 grams of sugar.
So that's what it is saying is in this.
Uh-huh.
And it's obviously an approximation because some tomatoes are going to be sweeter, have more sugar than others.
Mm-hmm.
But as a golden rule, tomatoes have a certain amount of sugar. It's
2.8?
Her eyes are a lot better than mine, apparently.
2.8 is that
So
number.
2.8 grams of sugar for every 100 grams of tomato.
Yeah.
That's the calculation that it's using. So that means that there's a total of 38.1, I believe it says,
sugar
in this container. Getting us so that we need to sanitize our hands again.
Yeah.
Okay, so then it took the amount of sugar that you would need to put in to go to 10.5%, subtracted the amount of sugar that's in this, so that when we add the sugar that it's suggesting, our final result, even though our gravity isn't going to correlate because the gravity is 1.002 and it doesn't have this in it, it will give us the sugar that we need to add to get to 10.5, including the sugar that's in the tomatoes. Yeah, tomatoes have quite a bit of sugar. But we're adding, what is it, 30 ounces?
It says, yeah, 29.86 ounces.
What do you want?
That's 4¼ cups, basically. That's a lot of sugar.
A lot of sugar. So we started off with 96 ounces of water. That's the reason why. What do you want? You're interrupting us. Do you care?
No, she doesn't.
The reason why we only went to 96 ounces is so we would have plenty of room to add the sugar and not go well over a gallon of must, because we don't want to have to pour it out when we rack out of this, I think, 1.6 gallon vessel, also linked in the description below. So we have plenty of room to add the 4 cups of sugar by going to the 96 ounce mark.
Right.
So while we've been doing this, we have had the main almost gallon of must in the refrigerator, cooling it down as well a little bit. We didn't need to put it in the freezer like we did this. We just wanted it to be a little bit cooler because we don't want it to hurt our pH meter when we get to that point.
Yeah.
So I'm going to grab it and we will continue. Thank God this sugar is going to be turned into alcohol, because that's a lot of...
It's a lot of sugar.
It's a lot of sugar. Just to make sure that I'm being clear on this, there is a lot of sugar that is locked up inside this fruit that is never going to be reflected on the hydrometer. It's inside the fruit, and it's the yeast job to get it out of there and turn it to alcohol. You would have to squeeze and squeeze and squeeze and get every ounce of sugar out of here, out of this fruit, into the must for that to be reflected, that sugar to be reflected on the hydrometer reading. It's not a problem. You just have to trust that the amount of sugar that the tool calculates that is in the fruit is actually in the fruit. And she's going to notate that on the batch note, so that when we get our ABV, we'll be taking into account the sugar that was locked up into the fruit. And when we do the racking video, we'll spend a little bit more time on that. But for now, one of the advantages of heating up this must is that the sugar is going to
dissolve pretty easily.
a lot easier. So I'm putting all the sugar in there. When we were hiking this morning, the guy that we passed mentioned that when I said that we drink a lot of wine, or I said that I drink a lot of wine, he says, yeah, wine's got a lot of sugar. I was thinking, we drink dry wine. It's got no sugar because it's all turned to alcohol. But
Well, it doesn't have very much sugar because it doesn't have very many carbs. So
it doesn't have any sugar if it's dry.
Well, it's got
Calories.
It still has grams of sugar in the fruit.
I'm using our pumpkin gutter to stir this up, mix it up really nice and well. Linked in the description below, of course. So I stirred that up when it was not full to a gallon, just because it makes it slosh less. This was at 96 ounces when we added that mass of sugar, and it's at 120 right now. So it's good that we didn't fill up to a gallon and then add our sugar, because we would be well over a gallon right now, and I wouldn't be happy about it because we would have to throw some of this out. The sugar and the water that we've added has cooled this down even more than the refrigerator did, so we should be safe to use our pH meter on it here in a sec. Okay, so I mixed that up when it wasn't quite full because it's easier to not slosh over the sides. So now I'm going to want to add the juice that has been collecting at the bottom of the
It's been sitting here.
Tomato catcher. Now that juice is going to have some of the sugar that our calculator has already accommodated. So don't worry about that. The tool, if you look at the tool, will give you an initial gravity to put on your batch note that is taking into account the amount of sugar that is in there, and I'll put it up on the screen because I can't see it from here.
And I'm making a note of how much sugar we put in there. Should I just say a whole lot of sugar?
A lot of sugar. So you're more than welcome to, at this point, squeeze some of this juice out. You don't need to do it. We're going to do that on the third day too, but
It's not a bad idea to do it.
so this is it exactly, which is really totally a coincidence.
Don't know how that happened.
It's at exactly 128 ounces at 1 gallon. So that's good. When we put the fruit back into it, it's going to be more than a gallon, but when we take the fruit back out, it will go back down to a gallon. And what we want to end up with after fermentation is a gallon, exactly. So right now we're there.
Cool.
I'm going to get the tomato juice off my hands. So our pH meter has been calibrated. It was calibrated this morning, so we're good for today's filmings. This must is warm. This thing will adjust for the temperature of the must. So it's not burning hot anymore anyway, so I'm not afraid I'm going to damage my meter. So we do have a video on pH. If you are not familiar with it, you can watch it to see why we're doing what we're doing. And the pH right now, once it stopped moving, is 376, 3.76.
3.76. Okay.
So we probably want to add about a quarter teaspoon of potassium bicarbonate because we want it to be up at around 4. So we will put some of this into our measuring cup. We're also going to put pectic enzyme in at the same time.
Move the fruit out of the middle of the way here. I gotta go
Pectic enzyme doesn't seem like, so what pectic enzyme does is it breaks down fruit particles. There really aren't any right now, but trust me, there will be. So we're putting that in now so that it has a chance to work on that fruit. Helps get a lot of the sugar out that wouldn't normally get broken down.
Okay.
Magically the stuff appears.
Cha-ching.
So she's doing the pectic enzyme. And then a quarter teaspoon of potassium bicarbonate. And that should get us pretty close to 4, probably close enough. I'm getting all of the crystallized bicarbonate out that I can. And then I'm going to pumpkin gut.
We should mention that if you want one of these pumpkin gutters for actually gutting pumpkins for Halloween, you better get them right now because they're really hard to find here shortly.
Oh, she's assuming you know when we are filming this. It's late August right now. They do start selling, well, prior to October. The pH is showing that it's 5.06, which is pretty much impossible with 1/4 teaspoon of potassium bicarbonate to go a full point. So I believe the temperature is messing with the meter. So you probably want to let the must cool completely down to room temperature before you do this. Either it was wrong before or it's wrong now, but they can't both be right. 1/4 teaspoon of potassium bicarbonate does not adjust to the full point ever. So moving on. I'm going to clean off our meter and we'll go to the next step. So now we are ready to work with our yeast. This is nice and warm, so the yeast is going to be loving this.
Super happy.
We don't need to heat it up.
Nope.
I'm guessing it's around 100 degrees.
Which will make
Feels warm to the touch. So.
It'll make this gopher a lot easier to mix up. So I am adding 2 teaspoons of gopher. Not a required ingredient. We just have good luck with it.
It helps your fermentation be more consistent and quicker if you use gopher and then Fermento. So we hydrate it with gopher. This is going to be in our 55-degree fermenting room, which means it's going to be a slow fermentation. So at that temperature, on the 5th day, I'll degas this. I'll add a teaspoon of Fermento, and then I'll oxygenate it. Now, we have ways that we do it that you don't necessarily need to follow. But if you want to, you can watch our oxygenation CO2 management video. We use a food saver and we use an oxygenation wand, aeration wand. But you can achieve the same thing just by stirring to get the CO2 out and to introduce oxygen by stirring kind of roughly. You don't want to do that after the 5th day. At that point, you can damage your wine by adding oxygen. But fifth day is good for. If you're doing it at a warmer temperature, then it's going to probably be closer to the 3rd day, not the 5th day.
And when are we going to squeeze the juice again?
We're also going to do that on the 5th day for, again, a cool fermentation.
Well, that mixed up really well.
When we squeeze it, sanitize your hands really well. Pull the bag out and then just squeeze as much of the juice out as you can and put the bag back in, and then you'll have crap all over your hands. This is going to have a lot of floaty stuff.
Yeah.
It will come out of the bag. The little tiny particles will come out of the bag, and this will look kind of gross. But it's not going to be gross. It should taste pretty good.
And if you don't use the bag, it's going to have all kinds of floaty stuff.
Yeah, I would recommend using a bag.
Yeah.
The other thing that we're going to need to do, but we're not going to know until we put the bag in here, is we're probably going to have to weight the bag down, or it's just going to float on the top.
Yeah.
And we'll see that here in just a second. Normally, if we hadn't done this heating process, if this wasn't warm must already because of the pasteurization thing, we would warm this up to about 90 degrees before she put the yeast in it. But because we used the immersion heater, it's already warm. It's good for the yeast.
And it's ready. So I'm going to go ahead and put a teaspoon of, we're using Fresco cider yeast.
Yeah, we're using cider yeast, which may sound a little bit funny, but this is really good with white wines too.
It does work well.
And this is technically going to be a white wine. It probably is going to, I'm thinking it'll probably end up similar to our Chenin Blanc.
Probably. I'm just going to lightly dunk this around a little bit just to get it hydrated, and then we will let this sit for 2 hours.
We're going to put it by a heater to keep it at about 90 degrees. You can also put it in the water heater room or someplace that's warm. You'll be fine probably without heating it, but again, a lot of the things we do are best practices to try to have more success a higher percentage of the time.
We like the yeast to be already thriving before we throw it in there. It seems to work better.
Can you give me our vessel?
Oh, the vessel. This thing.
So this is, I believe, 1.6 gallon. We also use little big mouth bubblers, which cost more than these, and are 1.6 gallon, I'm almost positive. This will give us the headroom that we need for our fruit. Because again, when we're done fermenting, we take our fruit out. We still want to have a gallon at the end of the day. So you need a vessel that's big enough to hold the gallon of must and the fruit. So this has been sanitized, as everything else has been. I could have done this the other direction. I could have put our fruit in first and then poured the must. It doesn't really matter that much.
We're going to find out if it floats now.
Even if it doesn't initially float, I would still recommend putting at least 1 or 2 weights in, because I've had them float after the first 24 hours where they didn't float initially. So we're going to pour the juice and the fruit. I don't care which order it happens.
Which way?
Did you tie off that? I do. You know, we're going to put a weight in now just because I know that we're going to need one. So this is a fermentation weight. This one came from Amazon. I'll have a link in the description below. They're not terribly expensive. They come usually in 4-pack. That's how I buy them. And these will keep the bag from floating at the top. You want to have this fruit completely covered by must the whole time. You don't want it to dry out, potentially get moldy at the top. So you want this to sink to the bottom. And these weights will
help it do that. These tomatoes are pretty heavy, though.
We might need 2. I have 6 more fruit wines that I am going to be starting tomorrow, and I want to make sure I don't run out of weights. So we're going to try to start this with 1.
You know what these look like? They look like the
laundry bags.
The bags, well, that too, but the bags that I put over my basil because the grasshoppers were eating it.
The same sort of thing. Probably the same company that makes them. So she's going to put that in there, hopefully without getting a bunch of juice that's lost. And just have to squeeze it a little.
I'm shoving it in.
It's not going to hurt anything for you to pull this bag out, again, after you sanitize your hands, and squeeze juice into it a lot more often than just the 3rd day. But the third day and then the day that I take it out, which I guess I should also tell you, I don't let any fruit or vegetables or anything else that we're making our wine with stay in the fermenter for more than 7 days.
Mm-hmm.
People do that and they get away with it. I don't. I pull it out on the 7th day. On the 5th day, I'll squeeze it to get all the juice out. And then on the 7th day, I will squeeze it to get all the juice out and then remove it. You feel free to keep it in there longer, but we've had bad luck, and I've heard horror stories about mold and other things that can happen if the alcohol percentage isn't high enough to keep the bad things from happening. So
It looks like it's going to stay down there pretty good.
I think we're good.
Yeah.
So both this and this are going to sit next to a heater for the next 2 hours to get nice and warm. This is already warm. It'll just stay warm. We want these to be pretty close to the same temperature when this goes into this. And
It's already.
this is very active yeast already. It's exploding. I don't know that I'll be able to get that on zoom in enough, but if I can, you can see that even that quickly, this really likes the ingredients of this,
It does.
including the go-firm and the sugar and a little bit of sugar from the tomato.
It likes tomatoes.
Who would have thought? Or maybe it's tomatoes.
Tomatoes. Could be.
So I'm not going to show you doing the degassing and the fermento and the aeration that happens on the 5th day. I will probably talk more about it when we come back after this is done fermenting. This particular jar has an inner seal that helps it be watertight. As people that use Little Big Mouth bubblers know, they're not watertight. This becomes more watertight, although it still does leak, just not as bad as a Little Big Mouth bubbler. It's got this lid that shuts on there to make it watertight. You don't want that lid closed. In fact, on some of these I've removed them. And then the lid goes on. And this is very close to the top, so there is a very good chance this is going to blow. It's going to come out the top when the fermentation goes. So a blow-off tube, I usually use silicone tubes, although PVC ones will sometimes work too, but silicone tubes, link in the description below. The tube just goes into here. The other end of the tube goes into the sanitizer that we're using today. The bucket of sanitizer will be on the floor, and that tube will go right into that bucket of sanitizer. That forms an airlock, so the CO2 and, unfortunately, some of this most likely, are going to come out through the top and go into that tube and go into the sanitizer. But nothing is going through the sanitizer, such as bugs and bad things, to get into the wine. So that's an airlock. But if you don't do that, if you just put a traditional airlock on here, when this gets nice and fermenting, based on how happy that yeast is already, it's coming out the top. It's going to go through your airlock and it's going to be all over your counter or whatever you've got it stored on. So I would suggest the blow-off tube.
If you have more headroom than this, you could get away with the traditional airlock.
Correct. So we will be back in probably 2 weeks to show you the next step. So it has been
About 3.5 weeks.
actually a little longer because we got busy with something, and this has been in the fridge. So it's cold crashed as well. Anytime you want the sediment to hit the bottom very quickly and very thoroughly, you can put it in your 34 or 35 degree refrigerator and keep it there for about 3 days. In this case, it's been there for about a week. 5 days after we saw you last, I degassed this using a food saver. I took the bag out and squeezed it, got all the juice out that I could. Then I added a teaspoon of fermento, and then I used our aeration wand to oxygenate it. And you can watch our video on CO2 and oxygen management to see how and why. A week after we saw you last, I again squeezed the bag, got all the juice out of it, and then I removed the bag. So that I don't like keeping the bag in with fruit any longer than a week, unless it's being used to infuse when you've got a high alcohol, and then it's not as big of a worry, but you can get mold and other unwelcome things growing if you leave it in there for more than a week in primary. So here we are. We cold crashed it, so the sediment's all at the bottom, and I know from putting it up here that this is very fine sediment, and it really will get stirred up easily. So I'm going
We'll
try
have to be careful.
try to not let that happen. So the final gravity was 0.990. So it doesn't get much drier than that. And that was a ABV of...
Oh, I didn't calculate that.
The way that I knew this was done was that final gravity reading stayed the same 3 days in a row. And really, I mean, once you hit 0.990, you pretty much are, you figure you're done. But there was absolutely no activity, no bubbling or anything at that point either. So again, with the sugar locked in the tomatoes, we are always going to be approximating what the ABV was, but with a final gravity of 0.990, that should be around 12.8% ABV, which is a healthy percentage for
a tomato wine.
So go ahead and rack this.
I'll come closer without stepping on Nori. Hi, Nori. Hi.
So I don't want any of the sediment, if possible. I'm going to tip this here to try to get as much depth on the liquid as I can. Okay, so because there was liquid in the tomatoes, we ended up with more must than we actually needed, but that's a good problem to have, and it's not a whole lot more must than we needed.
And there's some sediment starting to float in that anyway.
There's a lot of sediment in the liquid that's left behind, so we're going to clean up and then we'll keep going. Okay, one of the first things we want to do is taste this, but because we're working on a filming schedule, Julie pointed out that maybe we should do the Kiesasol first and then taste it.
Because you're supposed to let it sit in there to start working for an hour, which we never do, so this will give it a little extra time. We never do on camera, I should say, because, you know, time. So I put 1/8 of a teaspoon of that in there, and it can start doing its job.
And I'm just using our sucky thing to stir it up.
Sucky thing is the correct term for this utensil. Just look it up.
Even though this cold crashed, you can see some sediment floating around in there, so this will need to be probably cold crashed again.
Well, and these should help with that too.
So we want to taste this because at this point we don't know what we want to do with this. We may want to back sweeten it. We may want to add tomatoes back into it to give it some flavor. We just don't know. So we need to get an idea because that'll give us an idea of which of these, other than the clearing agents, that we need to put in it.
It's not every day you drink tomato wine.
I didn't yesterday, I can say that.
Well, that's interesting. Does not taste like tomatoes, I can tell you that. Tastes like a white wine. I mean, not one that I've ever had before, but tastes like a white wine.
Mm-hmm. So our options are to leave it like it is and not back sweeten it. And in that case, we probably would want to add the potassium metabisulfite to help stabilize it. But we wouldn't need to worry about adding potassium sorbate, which will hinder future fermentation because we're not going to be putting anything fermentable into it. Tomatoes are fermentable, so if we're going to put tomatoes into it, we want to add sorbate first.
I don't think I wanted it to taste more like tomato.
I wasn't really, well, I didn't know what we were after. So.
That's true.
But I think we probably want to do the full treatment just because right now we don't exactly know what we're going to do with it. So we have the Kiesasol in there. You would normally want to let that work for about an hour before you add its complement, chitosan. And the reason why is that the Kiesasol goes after the negative particles that are in here. You want to give it about an hour before you put chitosan, which goes after the positive particles, because otherwise they can work against each other a little bit. We also have bentonite, which is a clearing agent. And then potassium sorbate will, 24 hours after you put it in there, will keep the yeast that's currently in here from starting back up again. And then potassium metabisulfite does a little of that too, but it also adds SO2, which will help preserve the wine a little bit. And that's only going to be a factor if we were going to keep this for any amount of time. And I
highly doubt we're going to bottle it and age it for a year.
Probably not.
There is another option that we can do with this. We might have mentioned this earlier when we started this, but you can take some of this and put it, you could take the whole thing or you could take part of it and infuse some garlic and whatever herbs, spices into it and use it as a cooking wine, which is an interesting idea.
And it's very possible those things that you're going to put in it, such as garlic, might contain enough sugar to start fermenting if it warms up. So
Yeah.
that just solidifies the fact that I think we want to do all of these ingredients, depending on your situation. If you're going to drink it right away, or whatever, some of these may be optional for you, but we're going to do the full thing. And it's not great, but it's drinkable as a white wine.
Well, yeah, it's not my favorite thing in the world, but it wasn't, I didn't know what to expect. So I'm actually pleasantly surprised that it doesn't taste like tomato juice.
And this is high alcohol.
Yeah, 12.8.
And I can't really taste the alcohol, so the tomato does the job of covering up the alcohol taste, at least. And it's a little bit zesty too. Let's see what our pH is.
Oh yeah, I will write that down.
pH meter was calibrated yesterday. pH is right at 3.88. So conceivably, we should lower it down a little bit to help shelf stabilize it. So we'll probably add a little something. I don't know what.
That's a good question.
I'm going to say that it's probably not going to be tartaric.
You know what's in, well, okay, so what they use for canning tomatoes is citric acid.
I don't think citric would do any harm, especially if this is going to be used for cooking. Citric acid usually is too lemony or citrusy for most things that you're going to want to use to lower the pH. You can watch our video on pH. I probably already linked it in the first half of this, so you may have to look in the description to find the link to it. So I think when we add the other ingredients, we're going to put in maybe a 1/4 teaspoon of citric as well, just to lower that pH a little bit.
All right, give me some.
We want the pH to be 3.8 or lower for shelf stability. So, some juice.
And it's close, so we shouldn't have to add too much.
Some tomato juice.
It doesn't look like tomato juice, but yes, please.
Again, you want to let the queso sit in here for an hour if you can. Time is money for us in this case because we're filming, so we are going to be not waiting that long.
Money, huh?
Hard drive space, which does turn back into money, I've learned.
That is true.
Keep having to add hard drives.
So I'm putting a teaspoon of chitosan, then a 1/4 teaspoon of bentonite. Let me get the right one. 1/8. Those are both clearing agents. And then 1/2 teaspoon of potassium sorbate to keep whatever we decide to put in here from fermenting.
Yeah, again, it won't stop fermentation by itself. It it basically makes the yeast that's already in here inhospitable to future fermentation. It can't reproduce, and it basically is hindered. However, if you put new yeast in here through fruit that has not been properly cleaned of yeast or whatever the case may be, it can start back up again.
Okay, do we want to go ahead and put the citric acid in here before I dump it in there?
Yes. And I'm also going to clean off my pH meter.
This is very full because we never use it.
You might be able to tell that this is our first recording session of the day because she has not awarded me with my drink yet.
With your drink?
Whatever it is I'm drinking.
Oh, it's right there.
Never mind.
The milk crate was in the way. I didn't want you to knock it over.
Okay, well, what are we drinking? So these are...
I'll taste it and find out.
This is a cider that we bottled, and usually we write, if we're not going to the effort of putting a label on, the time and the effort and the cost of a label, we'll just write on the top what it is, and she took the top
But I
off.
took the lid off, so it's a guessing game.
This is hedge cider.
Yep, huckleberry. And we have a recipe for that.
We have a video for that.
Okay, I'm gonna stick this in here. Oh, you know what I didn't get you again?
The slotted spoon.
This spoon. I will take care of that right now. Ta-da! Spoon. Boy, that's full.
There looks to be some CO2 in this. That probably is mostly from the citric acid that we just added. The bubbling. That's
Oh,
probably
yeah.
not actually that's much CO2 that's in there. I didn't see it the first time I stirred it. If you make this, you taste it, you decide you want to add some fruit back into it, or tomato, I guess, is a fruit,
Yes, it is.
then you do want to let the potassium sorbate have 24 hours before you add that fruit. If you're going to do cooking wine like she's going to do and probably put herbs and garlic and so forth, again, just to be safe, you probably want to have your potassium sorbate in here and give it 24 hours.
I don't know for 100%, but I would guess that garlic could ferment.
Better to be safe than sorry.
Yeah.
If it does ferment, then you're going to have to let it finish again. You're going to end up with more alcohol than you wanted. And, you know, it could kind of screw up your timetable. So that is pretty much it. If you're going to bottle this in traditional bottles, which I don't think we are, you do want to either let it sit long enough or stir out the CO2 that is still in here. Let's get a pH.
Oh, yeah.
pH meter magically appears again. Yeah, we weren't looking for a big adjustment, and we didn't get a big adjustment. It's 3.77.
Oh, that's fine though.
So that's decent. That's going to be shelf stable for all intents and purposes. You're not going to age this for 10 years.
Unless
Most
you
likely.
really like tomato wine.
So that's pretty much all we're going to do. That was I probably couldn't do that if I tried. So there is a marble in there now. Great. It's food safe. And it's
And it's sterilized.
sanitized. So we're pretty much done with this for now. Tomorrow we will probably go ahead and put garlic and whatever else she wants to turn this into cooking wine, and then we will bottle it.
I have a plethora of basil in my garden right now.
We do.
Yep.
That's a good thing to put in there. Again, you do need to be careful. If you put something from your garden in here that has wild yeast on it, fermentation can start back up again when this warms.
For sure.
It's probably not going to because it's 13% basically alcohol. It's unlikely that it's going to start back up, but it could, and it's always better to be a little safer than sorry. So there are several ways that you can make sure that you have killed off the yeast. One of them is to heat whatever you're going to put in there, in this case basil, heat it up to 225 degrees for about 10 minutes, which isn't going to be enough to outright cook it, but it will kill the yeast, and that's probably what we'll end up doing. The most likely garlic, it's been in the fridge, is going to be safer, but I think we'd probably still want to do that just to make sure that we're not introducing live yeast, live wild yeast. The sorbate only takes care of the yeast that's in here currently,
Right.
and has been in here with it for 24 hours. New yeast definitely can start back up the fermentation. The other thing that would work against that is there isn't going to be there's not going to be a lot of sugar. This is very dry.
That is true.
It's only going to have the sugar and the
Garlic,
garlic that you're
which
adding.
is
And I am going to probably
minimal.
try to talk her into maybe putting some tomatoes in here too, because the tomato taste is not going to hurt anything with garlic and basil. And it will make it taste tomato-y again.
Well, for the cooking wine, I would put tomatoes back in it, but I wouldn't drink it that way.
Right.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. Alrighty.
So I think that's it for this one. This was kind of a spur of the moment thing. We had tomatoes in our garden. We hadn't made tomato wine before, so we learned together.
So right about now, anybody who's got tomatoes in their garden probably has an excess of tomatoes as well. And
If it's late season like it is here. Yep.
And this is one thing you can do with them. Thank you guys for watching another one of our videos. Hope you found it interesting. Maybe try it. If you do try it, please leave us comments. We want to see what you thought about it and what you ended up doing with it. Please like and subscribe. If you haven't subscribed already, that is. And if you have, thank you very much for your support. Until next time. Cheers.